Hey everyone, welcome to Advanced Scratch. Today we're going to be going over Lesson 1, so let's get right into it. Here's a quick overview for today's lesson. First, we're going to be learning about text input, and then we're going to be learning about picking random numbers and applying this to games. Before we do any of this though, let's start off with some review from Intermediate Scratch. There's going to be 3 questions, and I will ask each question, and then you guys can pause the video and try and answer it on your own. Then you guys can resume the video and I'll go over the answer. The first question is, what are the 3 types of blocks in Scratch and what do they do? Okay, let's go over the answer for this question. The first type of block is the action block, and action blocks do things. An example of this is the move 10 steps block. The second type of block is the conditional block, and conditional blocks compare things. An example of this is this block over here, which compares 2 values to each other, checking if the value on the left is larger than the value on the right. Finally, the third type of block is the reporter block, which returns things. An example of this is the pick random value block, which picks a random value between 1 and 10. Let's go to the second review question. What is a loop and what is an if statement? Okay, let's go over the answer to this question. Loops repeat actions multiple times. An example of a loop is the loop down here, repeat 10 times loop. An if statement checks if something is true or false and performs an action based on that. You can see the if statement down here. Final question. What are variables and what can you do with them? Okay, let's go over the answer to this question. Variables are like a container that you can store values in. You can make, set, and change variables. As you can see down here, we have a variable called myVariable, and you can set the variable to a value or you can change the variable by a value. Great, now that the review is out of the way, let's start learning some new concepts. The first concept we're going to learn is text input. So first of all, what is text input? Text input is when you enter a value in Scratch. It's basically when the program gives the user a slot to enter text, the user types something into that slot and hits enter, and then the program does something depending on your answer. To code text input in Scratch, you need to go under the sensing area and choose the ask block. You can write whatever prompt you want inside of here. Scratch will basically ask that prompt to the user and then will take in an answer. Speaking of answers, you can find the answer block right underneath the ask block, and the answer contains the value that the user entered into the text field. Let's look at an example to understand this a bit better. We have a segment of code here which asks the user how old they are and then has some if and else statements. So why don't you guys pause the video for a second and try and figure out what this code does. Let's go over the answer now. This code asks the user his or her age and then prints something based on that input. So we have the ask block over here which asks the user how old they are, and if the answer is less than 13, meaning if the user says a number that is less than 13, like 12 or 11 or 10 or 9 or 8, etc., then the program is going to say you are not a teen. Otherwise, the program is going to say you are old. Now it's your guys' turn to do this. I want you guys to make a program that asks if the weather is sunny, rainy, or windy and prints something based on each answer. A hint for this program is you will need multiple if and else statements. Let's take a look at what I mean by this. So when we start the program, it asks, what is the weather? And notice how it's taking my text input in here. I'm going to type in sunny, for example, and it will tell me to wear a t-shirt. Now let's say I type in rainy instead. It tells me to bring an umbrella instead. And if I type in windy, it tells me to wear a jacket. Notice how it had a different response for each thing I typed in. because it wouldn't make sense for it to tell me to bring an umbrella if it was sunny outside, or wear a jacket if it was rainy outside. So you guys can pause the video and take as much time as you need to work on this project, and then afterwards I will go over the answer with you guys. Okay, I'm assuming you guys took a little bit of time to work on this project. Let's go over the answer. We can start off the program with the when flag is clicked block, and then we can use the ask block to get the user's input. And we can ask the user what is the weather. Then we can use if and else statements to check for each possible answer. Our first if statement checks if the answer is equal to sunny, and if it does, then we say wear a t-shirt. Now notice how we have an else statement here, but then we have an if statement inside of the else statement. That might confuse you guys a bit at first, but this is actually the correct way to do it, because we want to be able to check for more than two possibilities. So we have our else statement, and then inside we have another if statement, which checks for if the answer is rainy. If it is, then we'll say bring an umbrella. And then in our else statement, we have another if statement, which checks if the answer is windy. If it is, then we're going to say wear a jacket. Finally, in the last else statement over here, this means that the answer wasn't sunny, rainy, or windy, in which case we don't really know what the user is saying, so we're just going to say, I don't know what you're saying. Hopefully you guys were able to work on that project and get close to the answer. Let's move on to our next concept now, which is random numbers. A random number generator chooses a random number between two values that you give it. So for example, if you give it a minimum value of 1 and a maximum value of 10, it would choose a random number between 1 and 10. And as you guys can guess, the possible numbers that it can choose are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. It can't choose 11, it can't choose 12 or 100, or it can't choose -1 or -2, because all of those other values I just said are not between 1 and 10. It can only choose a number between 1 and 10. Now you guys might be wondering, why would we use a random number generator? It doesn't really sound that useful for games, but they actually have many applications. It's very important for choosing turns in a lot of turn-based games, if you guys have played a game like Pokemon, etc. It's also very important for choosing random cards in a card game. As you guys may know, in a card game, there's the deck in the middle that you have to take a card from, and when you take a card, you get a completely random card. You could get a heart card, or you could get a spades card, and the number will also be completely random on the card. And there are many other examples of random number generators being useful in games. These are only a few. Let's look at the code for picking a random number. You can go under the operators section and choose the pick random block right over here. Then you can set a variable to that random number and use that variable for your program. Now it's your guys' turn. Make a program that uses text input and a randomizer. The user should guess a number in a range. I would recommend the range to be 1 through 10. And the program will tell the user whether the guess is right or wrong. The user wins when they guess the right number. Here is the block to help you set a variable to a random number in case you're having trouble doing that. You can say set, and then my variable to pick random number between 1 and 10. And a hint for this project is you want to keep on asking the user for a number until they guess the correct number. And I want you guys to think about what can you use to repeat code. Okay, before you guys start working on the project, I'm just going to quickly show you guys what it should look like. So the program's going to ask you to enter a number, and you can just enter a number like I'm going to say 6, and then it tells me that it's wrong, and it tells me to guess again. So I'm going to guess 4. Okay, it's not 4, maybe it's 3. That's not right, maybe it's 2. Oh, I won, it was 2, the random number was 2. So that is how the program should run. So I want you guys to pause this video with everything that we just went over, the hint and the project description. I want you guys to try this project out, and then when you're ready to see the answer, you can resume this video and I will explain it. Okay, I'm assuming that you guys just worked on the project. Let's go over the answer now. We can start off with the when flag is clicked block, and then set a variable. The variable can be called whatever you want it to be called. We're going to set that variable to pick random number between 1 and 10. So every time we run the program, this variable is a random number between 1 and 10. Next, we want to use a forever loop. This is the answer to the hint I gave you guys, where I asked you what can you use to repeat code. You want to use a forever loop to repeat code until the player guesses the correct number. Finally, inside the forever loop, we ask the user to enter a number, and then we use if and else statements to check if the player guessed the correct number. We say if the variable is equal to the answer, then we're going to say you won, and we're going to stop the program. Otherwise, we're going to say that they are wrong, and then the code is going to repeat again since it's inside a forever loop. If the player wins, we have the stop all block, which stops the program, and the code will stop repeating as well. Hopefully you guys were able to understand that project. So we went over text input, and we also went over random numbers. Before we end off this lesson, let's just do some review to make sure you guys have all these concepts in your head. The first question is, how do you code for text input? You can pause the video and try to answer it, and then I'll reveal the answer. The answer for this question is you can use the ask block and the answer block. The next question is, give an example of using text input in a program. Okay, an answer for this is asking for a name, but there are many other answers you guys could have come up with. The third question is, how do you code a number randomizer? The answer is using the pick random block and entering the minimum value and maximum value. So for example, you could pick a random number between 1 and 10. Finally, is it possible to use text input and number randomizers in the same program? The answer to that is yes. We just did that in our last activity, right? So it is definitely possible to use text input and number randomizers in the same program. Okay, hopefully you guys understood both text input and number randomizers. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you guys in lesson 2. Bye everyone.